All right, so welcome to another deep dive. This week, we are going to be taking a closer look at the top crypto news stories. Just sort of taking a look at the week leading up to April 6th, 2025.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we've got a pretty interesting mix to cover here today. Everything from, how crypto is reacting to kind of more traditional market stuff, to some pretty big moves that suggest, more widespread adoption might be on the horizon, right? So, yeah, today our mission is to sort of break down all of this and see if we can figure out what it all means for the current state of crypto and where things might be headed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've got, tariffs and Bitcoin and big financial moves, and I think we'll see that a lot of these stories are kind of tied together in interesting ways.
Yeah. So to get us started, we've put together this compilation. We're calling it Top 10 Crypto News Stories this week. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about President Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcements.
Right. So the stock market, kind of the traditional markets, took a bit of a hit from this, but, the reaction from Bitcoin was, well, I think maybe surprising to some people.
Yeah, it was interesting. While traditional stocks were dropping, Bitcoin actually bounced back. So it had dipped below $81,500 and then recovered back up towards $84,000. So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe investors are starting to view Bitcoin differently compared to, these more traditional assets, particularly when there's this economic uncertainty.
Yeah, that is interesting. Now, some of the analysts that you've looked at are saying that maybe Bitcoin is acting as a hedge in this situation. But what do you think are some of the specific factors that are driving this? I mean, is it just that people are, nervous about the tariffs and kind of fleeing to safety, or is there something more to it? It's probably a bit of both, right? You've got increasing institutional interest in Bitcoin, and there's maybe this shift away from thinking of Bitcoin as just a really risky asset. And if you look at some of the on-chain data, it actually shows that larger holders, the whales, were accumulating more Bitcoin during this dip. So that suggests to me that they have a long-term view of Bitcoin, and they're not really fazed by the short-term volatility.
Yeah, it's almost as if they're saying, these tariffs, they're a problem for the traditional markets, but Bitcoin is a safe haven.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so kind of building on that idea, right, of crypto becoming more accepted, especially as these, traditional markets get a little shaky, we're also seeing some pretty big moves from like mainstream platforms, right, to make it easier for people to get into crypto. And one of the biggest stories here has got to be PayPal and Venmo adding Chainlink and Solana for U.S. users. What do you think about that one?
That's a huge deal. I mean, think about it now. Users on these massive platforms, they can buy Chainlink, they can buy Solana, they can hold it, they can sell it, they can even transfer it all without ever having to go to a crypto exchange. It makes it so much easier for regular people to get involved.
Yeah. So what do you think this means for Chainlink and Solana? Will this lead to their prices going up? And maybe even more importantly, will this actually lead to more real world uses for them?
Right. Well, if we're talking about mainstream adoption, having these coins easily available on platforms like PayPal and Venmo, that's going to lead to more demand, right? More people are going to be buying them, holding them, and maybe even, using them within these platforms. And all of that can definitely push the price up. But I think, the bigger picture here is that it could also encourage developers to build more real world applications for these coins. I mean, Chainlink, for example, it's all about bringing, real world data onto blockchains. And Solana, it's really focused on being super fast and scalable. So, this integration could lead to some really interesting use cases that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, it's about making these, these altcoins more tangible, more useful for everyone. Okay, cool. So speaking of altcoins making moves, let's talk about XRP. So Coinbase Derivatives has filed to launch XRP futures contracts. They're targeting April 21st for the go-live date. And, XRP itself has actually bounced back above $2 recently. So what's your take on this?
Well, this is another sign that the XRP market is maturing.
Yeah.
When you have regulated futures contracts, it attracts a broader range of investors, especially institutional investors, because they often need those kinds of tools, those financial instruments for hedging and for more complex trading strategies. So it's a way for bigger money to get into XRP, which is already a pretty big cryptocurrency in terms of market cap.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about Bitcoin doing well despite the tariff worries, but, the U.S. publicly traded crypto stocks like Coinbase and Robinhood and MicroStrategy, they actually went down after the tariff announcements.
Yeah, that's right. Those companies saw their stock prices drop, anywhere from 7 to 11%. And I think it just reflects this broader sense of caution among investors when there's this kind of uncertainty in the global markets. People tend to pull back from riskier assets, and that includes a lot of these crypto related stocks. So even though Bitcoin was holding up pretty well, investors were still a bit nervous about these companies that are so closely tied to crypto.
Hmm. Yeah. It's almost like they're saying, hey, we like the technology, but we're not so sure about the companies that are dealing with it right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So some of the experts you've spoken with, though, they seem to think that this dip in crypto stocks might just be temporary.
Yeah.
What's the thinking there?
Well, the argument is that cryptocurrencies, especially the decentralized ones, they have this fundamental value proposition, right? They can operate outside of the traditional financial systems, outside of government control. And as these traditional systems come under more pressure, from things like trade wars and tariffs, then crypto might start to look even more attractive. So even though the stocks might be down in the short term because of, just general market jitters, the underlying crypto assets, they could actually benefit in the long run.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, so let's move on to stablecoins. There's a lot happening in this space right now with, Ethena, Ripple, and Circle all making some big moves. For our listeners who might not be as familiar with stablecoins, can you just give us a quick explanation of what they are?
Sure. So a stablecoin is basically a cryptocurrency that's designed to maintain a stable price. It's usually pegged to a fiat currency like, the US dollar. So the idea is that you get the benefits of crypto, the speed, the low cost, the transparency, but without the volatility that you see with something like Bitcoin.
Got it. Okay. So what are some of the big developments that we're seeing with stablecoins right now?
Well, first of all, you've got Athena's USDTB. It just broke into the top 10 stablecoins by market cap. So that shows you that there are new players coming up with innovative ways to maintain that stability. Then you have Ripple's RLUSD. It's surpassed its competitors in terms of volume to TVL ratio. And TVL, that stands for total value locked. It's basically the amount of assets that are deposited in a DeFi protocol. So a high volume to TVL ratio means that for every dollar locked in their system, they're seeing a lot of transactions. So it suggests that people are actually using it, not just holding it. And then you've got Circle's EURC, which is pegged to the euro. It just hit an all-time high, and that's largely driven by the regulatory changes in Europe that are actually making it easier for people to use stablecoins. So all of this shows that stablecoins are becoming more integrated into the whole crypto ecosystem. They're not just this little niche thing anymore.
Yeah, it seems like they're really becoming a part of the whole DeFi movement, right?
Yeah.
Decentralized finance.
Absolutely. And maybe even traditional finance eventually. I mean, they offer the stability that's really appealing, especially in a market that can be as volatile as crypto.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about market reactions. We've talked about mainstream adoption. We've talked about stable coins. Now let's get into some of the more specific moves that we're seeing. So there's this report that over $123 million worth of Bitcoin was moved off of a major U.S. exchange. What do you make of that?
Right. So when you see a big movement like that, especially when Bitcoin is being withdrawn from an exchange, it usually gets people speculating. They start talking about the whales, the big investors, and whether they're getting ready to buy more Bitcoin. The thinking is that if you're moving your Bitcoin off an exchange, it means you're probably planning to hold it for a while, in a secure wallet,
Mm.
rather than having it readily available to trade. So it could be a sign that the price is about to go up, especially if multiple whales are doing the same thing.
It's like watching a game of chess, right?
Yeah.
You see these big pieces moving around, and you're trying to figure out what the next move is going to be.
Exactly.
Okay. Speaking of big moves, GameStop raised $1.5 billion, and they said they're going to use it to buy Bitcoin. That's pretty wild, right? I mean, what does this tell us about where crypto is headed?
Yeah, I mean, GameStop, they're not exactly known for being, a traditional company, but for them to make such a huge investment in Bitcoin, it shows that crypto is gaining legitimacy even among more mainstream businesses. It's almost like, companies are starting to think about diversifying their holdings, and crypto is becoming a part of that. So it really blurs the lines between traditional finance and the crypto world.
It's almost like they're saying, you know what, we believe in this. We think this is the future.
Right, right.
Okay, so we've got GameStop making this huge move, and then you've got the CEO of BlackRock, one of the biggest players in traditional finance, and he's saying that Bitcoin could challenge the dollar as the world's reserve currency. That's a pretty big statement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a huge statement. And for someone like the CEO of BlackRock to say something like that, it really means something. It means that even at the highest levels of traditional finance, people are starting to recognize that Bitcoin has the potential to play a much bigger role in the global economy. And it's interesting that he's saying this, in the context of these tariff disputes and the pressure that they're putting on the dollar. So, it really makes you think about the long-term implications for global finance and the whole monetary system.
Yeah, it's like the ground is shifting under our feet, right?
Yeah.
And we're not quite sure what the new landscape is going to look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what's happening within the crypto space itself. So Ethereum has overtaken Solana in terms of decentralized exchange, or DX, trading volume. What's behind this shift?
Well, it seems like the meme coin craze that really benefited Solana, it's starting to cool off. And Ethereum, with its more established infrastructure and its bigger ecosystem of decentralized applications, it's attracting more trading volume again. So it just shows that while speed and low fees are important, they're not the only things that matter.
Yeah.
The overall robustness of the ecosystem is also a huge factor.
Yeah, it's like, Solana was the hot new thing for a while, but Ethereum is still the OG, right? It's the one that people trust.
Right.
Okay, so last but not least, we have this news about World Liberty Financial. It's a crypto venture that's connected to the Trump family, and they reportedly raised a lot of money. What's the key takeaway from this?
Well, it just highlights the fact that crypto is becoming more and more intertwined with politics. The fact that a venture linked to a prominent political family can attract so much investment, it shows that crypto is becoming a real force to be reckoned with, both financially and politically. And it's also a reminder that, as governments start to take more of an interest in crypto, we're going to see more of this kind of thing, this intersection of crypto and politics.
Yeah, it's definitely a space to watch. Okay, so let's wrap things up. What would you say are the key takeaways from this week in crypto?
Well, I think we've seen that crypto is proving to be pretty resilient. Even with all the global uncertainty, Bitcoin is holding up pretty well. We're also seeing that mainstream adoption is continuing to grow with big platforms like PayPal and Venmo getting involved. The stablecoin market is maturing, becoming more regulated and more integrated into the broader crypto ecosystem. And we're seeing some really big moves from institutional and corporate players like GameStop, which suggests that they're starting to see crypto as a long-term investment.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And, it's interesting to see how the market is reacting to all of this, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've got the crypto stocks that are down because of the global uncertainty, but then you've got Bitcoin that's holding strong. So it's a really complex picture, but it's definitely a fascinating one.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big questions that we need to keep asking ourselves is how is all of this going to reshape the global financial system? You've got the CEO of BlackRock saying that Bitcoin could challenge the dollar. You've got GameStop putting a huge chunk of their money into Bitcoin. So what does this all mean for the future of money and finance? It's a question that we don't have the answer to yet, but it's one that we need to keep thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and keep those questions in mind, as you watch the crypto world unfold. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See you next time.